Hello, and welcome back to A Hush Hideaway. So we missed last week. Life here has been pretty crazy with all the repairs from the flood still happening in our home. But hopefully here soon we'll be able to get everything back in working order and have more of a normal schedule for you. Regardless, thank you for being patient and still listening every time we upload a new episode. So today we're going to explore an old Irish story about a young bride being taken by fairies. Yeah. So this story is of Ethna the Bride, Lady Wilde. We're going to do it a bit differently today than our last few episodes. Today, I'm actually going to read this story along with you guys as it is written. I haven't completely finished the story myself. I do know vaguely a little bit what it's about, but I haven't actually finished it. And as I read it, I can kind of stop and elaborate through, maybe put my comments here and there. And we're going to try it this way for today. But first, for those that do not know what fairies are, let's kind of go over like a general aspect of what fairies are in Irish mythology. So, if you remember, if you have listened to a previous episode about banshees, some of these terms and names may sound a bit familiar to you because we kind of went more in depth about certain things that kind of involved fairies in that episode. So, if you're wanting more in depth, I suggest going back to that episode and listening more in on the banshees because they are also considered a type of fairy. So, Irish fairies are often referred to as the Eshi. It's Aossi, which translates to the people of the mounds. These mystical beings are said to live in ancient burial mounds, forests, lakes, residing in a realm parallel to that of the human world. Other names for like Irish fairies is the Tuatha which is another thing that we kind of went on more in depth about in the Banshee episode. So again, if you haven't seen that one, heard that one, or seen that one, if you're on YouTube, I suggest going back through that if you want to learn more about the Tuatha. But they're a supernatural race believed to be the ancestors of the Eshi. And then Fae, which is a broader term that includes Irish fairies and other mythical beings from Celtic folklore. Now, Fae is what you're usually going to hear in like a race that's more so in like romantasy books, what they usually refer to as Fae. But they can be really anything. That's just a broad spectrum of fairies, is what Fae is. Now, these can include like leprechauns, banshees, pukas, marrows, which is like the Irish version of a mermaid, and all different kind of other creatures in the fairy characterization. Now, what do the Irish believe about fairies? Because this is kind of going to be about the book itself, the story. So in Irish folklore, fairies are deeply respected and often feared. Many believe that disturbing their domain, whether it's a fairy ring or a mound or a sacred tree, can bring misfortune. Fairies are thought to be protective of nature in their hidden realm, rewarding kindness and punishing greed or disrespect. Now, they're also known as guardians of the other world. Fairies are believed to dwell in magical realms parallel to ours, accessible through certain portals. So, fairy forts, ancient ring forts, or mounds are considered sacred homes of the Eshi. Offerings and respect, leaving food or small gifts can appease fairies and ensure good fortune, which we may have one about like changelings. That you'll learn a lot more about that if we do a changelings episode. There's so much lore when it comes to different fairies and fairy races and whatnot in old Celtic and Irish mythology that we could go on for days. Now, with that being said, we're going to go ahead and continue on to our story. Now, as I said earlier, too, we are doing this differently. So I'm going to be open commenting to this story as we read straight from the source. So bear with me. Okay. So, Ethna the Bride, Lady Wilde. The fairies, as we know, are greatly attracted by the beauty of mortal women, and Finvara, the king, employs his numerous spirits to find out and carry off, when possible, the prettiest girls and brides in the country. These are spirited away by enchantment to his fairy palace at Nokma in Tuam, where they remain under a fairy spell, forgetting all about the earthly life and soothed to passive enjoyment, as in a sweet dream, by the soft low melody of the fairy music, which has the power to lull a hearer into a trance of ecstasy. Now, if there's anything in here that I do not pronounce right, I am sorry. Like I said, I am reading this straight out of the book, so I have not been able to look up any pronunciations. So, again, if I do pronounce it wrong, I am sorry. There was once a great lord in that part of the country who had a beautiful wife called Ethna, the loveliest bride in all the land, and her husband was so proud of her that the day after he had festivals in her honor, and from morning till night his castle was filled with lords and ladies, and nothing but music and dancing and feasting and hunting and pleasure was thought of. One evening, while the feast was merriest, and Ethna floated through the dance in her robe of silver gossamer, clasped with jewels more bright and beautiful than the stars in the heaven, she suddenly let go the hand of her partner and sank to the floor in a faint. They carried her to the room where she laid long quiet, insensible, but towards the morning she woke up and declared that she had passed the night in a beautiful place, and was so happy that she longed to sleep again and go there in her dreams. And they watched her all day, but when the shades of the evening fell dark on the castle, low music was heard at her window, and Ethna again fell asleep into a deep trance from which nothing could arouse her. Then her old nurse was set to watch her, but the woman grew weary in silence and fell asleep, and never awoke till the sun had risen. And when she looked towards the bed, she saw, to her horror, was a young bride who had disappeared. The whole household was roused up at once, and the search made everywhere, but no trace of her could be found in all the castle, nor in the gardens, nor in the park. Her husband sent messengers in every direction, but to no purpose. No one had seen her. No sign of her could be found, living or dead. Then the young lord mounted his swiftest steed and galloped right off to Nokma to question Finvar, the fairy king, if he had any tidings of the bride, or direct him to where he could search for her, for he and Finvar were friends, and many of a good keg of Spanish wine had been left outside the window of the castle the night for the fairies to carry away, by order of the young lord. But he had little dreamed now that Finvar himself was the traitor, so he galloped on like mad till he reached Nokma, the hill of fairies. As he stopped to rest his horse by the fairy rath, he heard voices in the air above him, and one said, "Right glad is Finvar now, for he has a beautiful bride in his palace at last, and never more will she see her husband's face." Yet another answered, "If he dig down through the hill to the center of the earth, he would find his bride. But the work is hard, and the way is difficult, and Finvar has more power than any mortal man." "That is yet to be seen," exclaimed the young lord. "Neither fairy nor devil nor Finvar himself shall stand between me and my fair young wife." And on an instant he sent word to his servants to gather together all the workmen and laborers of the country round with their spades and pickaxes to dig through the hill till they came to the fairy palace. And the workmen came, and a great crowd of them, and they dug through the hill all that day till a great deep trench was made down the very center. Then at sunset they left off for the night, but the next morning they assembled again and continued the work. Behold, all the clay that was put back again into the trench, and the hill looked like as if it was never spade had touched it, for Finvar had ordered, and he was powerful over earth, air, and sea. But the young lord had a brave heart, and he made the men go again to all the work, and the trench was dug again, wide and deep, into the center of the hill. And this went on for 3 days, but always with the same result, for the clay was put back again each night, and the hill looked up the same as before, and they were never no nearer to the fairy palace. Then the young lord was ready to die for rage and grief, but suddenly he heard a voice near him whisper into the air The words it said were these: "Sprinkle the earth you have dug up with salt, and your work will be safe." On this new life came to his heart, he sent word through all the country to gather salt from the people, and the clay was sprinkled with it the night when the men had left off their work to the hill. Next morning they arose up early with great anxiety to see what had happened, and there, to their great joy, the trench was all safe, just as it had left it. All the earth was round and untouched. Then the young lord knew he had the power over Finvar. He bade the men's work with good heart, for they soon reached the fairy palace, now in the center of the hills. So by the next day, their great glen was cut right through the deep down middle of the earth, and they could hear the fairy music if they put the ear close to the ground. The voices were heard round them in the air. "See now," said one, "Finvar is sad, for if one of those men strike a blow on the fairy palace with their spades, it will crumble to dust and fade away just like the mist." "Then let Finvar give up the bride," said another, "and we shall be safe." On which the voice of Finvar himself was heard, clear like the note of a silver bulge through the hill. "Stop your work," he said. "O men of earth, lay down your spades, and at sunset the bride shall be given back to her husband. I, Finvar, has spoken." Then the young lord bade them to stop work and lay down their spades till the sun went down, and at sunset he mounted the great chestnut steed and rose to the head of the glen and watched and waited. Just as the red light flushed the sky, he saw his wife come along the path with her robe of silver gossamer, more beautiful than ever, and he sprang from the saddle and lifted her up before him and rode away like the storm wind back to the castle. And there they had laid Ethna on her bed, but she closed her eyes and spoke no word. So day after day passed, and still never spoke or smiled, but seemed like one in a trance. And the great sorrow fell upon everyone, for they feared that she had eaten the fairy food, and that the enchantment would never be broken. So her husband was very miserable. But one evening, as he was riding home late, he heard the voices in the air. One of them said, "It is now a year and a day since the young lord brought home his beautiful wife from Finvar. But what good is she to him? She is speechless like one dead, for her spirit is with the fairies, though her form is beside him." And then another voice answered, "And so she will remain unless the spell is broken. He must unloose the girdle from her waist that is fastened with the enchanted pin, and burn the girdle with fire, and throw the ashes before the door, and bury the enchanted pin in the earth. Then will her spirit come back from the fairyland. She will once more speak and have a true life." Hearing this, the young lord had set spurs to his horses, and reaching the castle hastened to the room where Ethna lay on the couch, silent, beautiful like a waxen figure. Then began determined to test the truth of the spirit voices. He untied the girdle, and after much difficulty extracted the enchanted pin from the folds. But still Ethna spoke no word. And when he took the girdle and burned it with fire, he strewed the ashes before the door, and he buried the enchanted pin in a deep hole in the earth under the fairy thorn, that with no hand might disturb the spot. After which he returned his young wife, who smiled as she looked at him, and held forth her hand. Great was his joy to see the soul returning back to the beautiful form. He raised her up and kissed her, and speech and memory came back to her in that moment. All her former life just as had been broken or interrupted. But the year that her spirit had passed in the fairyland seemed to her but a dream of a night from which she had just awoken. After this, Finvar made no further efforts to carry her off, but the deep cult in the hill remains to this day, and is called the Fairy Glen, so no one can doubt the truth of the story here as narrated. And that's kind of crazy. Honestly, I haven't looked up, but I would try to see if there's any actual pictures, and if there is, I will put them on here for those who are watching on YouTube. If there is actual pictures of any marks in the fairy glen, so they call it, if there is, that'd be really neat to actually see. I know that if you go over there is different, like, as you can do here, there's like ghost tours. I know if you go over there's fairy tours where you can see things in places that are supposedly where fairies reside. So, and proof of them, which would be kind of cool to do. I know there's a whole bunch of them that I would like to see and explore, but we can talk more on different ones another time. Regardless, the story itself is vaguely disturbing in a sense that if anybody else reads like romantasy books or anything like that, there's so many of them of like fae carrying off human girls and then them never coming back. And, there's rumor of don't eat the fairy food and stuff like that. And so many different fictional books that you don't realize until you know like the lore and mythology of all of them, like how much I want to put truth in parentheses because how much truth it is to the lore itself in the mythology. But it's very cool to look it up. So if anybody else does read any fantasy books, and you have any others that definitely go along with more like mythology from the Celtic or Irish fairies, tell me about them. I love to read, so that's really interesting to me. Anyways, today's word of the days is super-annuated. Okay, so obsolete through age or new technology or intellectual developments. So to be super-annuated isn't really super. This adjective comes from the Latin word super-annuatus, which means to be old. The verb superannuate means to retire because of old age. The adjective form superannuated describes anything forced out of service due to age. Nowadays, this could get like an employer in big trouble, but the word might still be used to talk about people going into retirement by choice. However, the term is most commonly used to describe tools and appliances being superannuated due to tech upgrades such as smart features like smartphones and whatnot. The little Nokia is superannuated due to, Apple. But and last but not least, this week's fragment of fixation is a website called Strawberry Jam 1986. So, with school starting soon and me finally going back, I have been needing to update a lot of my technology. And that being said, my Facebook reels are just popping up with all different kind of things, which included keyboards. And I do have this thing for what is called a creamy sounding keyboard. Now, I didn't know that the term creamy clink was an actual sound until today when I was like researching it. There's like typewriter sound and there's like a creamy clink sound. I always just described it as like a muffled, smooth, like swift sounding clank. But it's called a creamy clink. But this website has very many like different customizable keyboards and keycaps. You can get them in almost any way, as well as all different sounding ones that just like scratch your brain just the right way. If I'm going to be using it a lot, I want to like one that sounds good, I guess. They're a little bit on the higher price side, but with how customized and how nice they sound, it makes sense. So if you are in the market for a keyboard and you can afford a really nice one and end up ordering one from her, I know that she's based out of California, I'm pretty sure. Let me know how you like it, because I might just, I don't know, splurge on one. And at last, it is that time again. If you like this episode or any others, please make sure to like and follow, tell a friend, leave a good review. And if you do, I may even just read it at the end of an episode. That would be fun. Make sure to visit our website, ahushedhideaway.com, a hushed, HUSHED, hideaway, HIDEAWAY.com, and sign up for our newsletter, which is late, I know, but it is going to be coming out soon. Bear with me here. Hopefully I can get it out this week. Until next story.